Welcome to Teaching Truth. Have you ever sat down and mapped out your family tree? I'm endeavouring to do that at the moment, and it's very interesting when you do to observe all the different relationships that there are within the wider family, particularly in previous generations. Great aunts, great uncles, second cousins, great grandparents. For example, my grandparents on my father's side were Ellen and William, who lived in a little village called Shelley in Yorkshire, in last of the summer wine country. My grandfather, William, he worked in the cotton mills in Huddersfield. On my mother's side, Janet and John were my grandparents. My grandfather, who I never knew, he was a policeman in Lanark. It's interesting to look back and to see the generations that came before. Joseph's family tree, indeed Jacob's family tree, and all the relationships within that wider family are documented for us in Genesis 46. Yesterday I read through all these names, some very interesting names in those days. The names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt. Jacob and his sons, and many, many other sons and daughters as well. Pause and ask yourself the question, why in Genesis 46, and for the large part of Genesis 46, why is it that all these names are mentioned? Are these names mentioned just to fill up a page, just to make the chapter a little bit more meaty? Well, absolutely not. Genealogy, family, was important and remains important to the Israelite, to the Jewish nation. The family tree is of vital importance, and that is why the family tree, as it were, is documented for us in the narrative of Genesis 46. And so as we think today about the story of these generations, these relations as it were, this big family traveling together across Egypt, we want to think about the fact that all his descendants he brought with him into Egypt. Note what it says in the passage. All the descendants came into Egypt. This shows the great faith that Jacob had. He brought the entire family down to Egypt. He didn't leave half of the family behind in Canaan just to establish a presence there, to keep the home fires burning, as it were. No. Jacob was 100% in, because Jacob, through the promise that God had given him, knew one day that they would be back. And therefore Jacob stepped out in faith and took his family with him. A challenge there for fathers, mothers, parents, grandparents, to step out in faith. Take your family, take your son, take your daughter with you on the spiritual journey. It's interesting that the sons of Judah are mentioned. Why is that interesting, you say? Well, the sons of Judah are of special note because this is the messianic lineage. The line of descent to this point went like this: Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, to Judah, to Perez, to Hezron. Just read Luke 3:33 to 39. before. And eventually, yes, you end up with Jesus. Do you see how woven into this narrative of Genesis 46 is the hidden hand of God at work, working through the generations all the way to Jesus? All the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. The total number of males of this clan was 70. There were 66, plus Jacob himself, Joseph, and his 2 sons. Why do I mention that figure 70? Well, from that figure of 70, this large enough family, I mean, if I had a family of 70, it would be a large family. But this large family would become a nation of probably around, if not over, 2 million over the next 400 years. Why is that significant, you ask? Well, it's significant if for no other reason than this, that like many great works of God, Israel had a slow beginning. The mustard seed, as it were, is often God's way of doing great things. You see, from the time God called Abraham, it took at least 25 years to add one son, Isaac. It then took Isaac 60 years to add another son of Israel, Jacob. So there, right away, you have 85 years. It then took 50 or 60 years for Jacob to add 12 sons and 1 daughter. You're into around about 130, 140 years. But in 430 years, Israel would leave Egypt with around 600,000 men. Why do I share these numbers, these facts with you? Well, simply to say this, that seed that was sown in Abraham's day, that found its expression through Jacob and Joseph's wider family, grew into that great nation of Israel. And the challenge for us today is we reflect on the family, the human family that we are a part of, is to think of those generations that went before, those who taught us well, those who sowed the seed of the gospel in our own lives. In recent weeks, this has taken on a particular poignancy for me with the loss of my dear, dear father, a fine Christian gentleman who taught me the paths of discipleship, who loved and served the Lord, who blessed me in more ways than you will ever know or can ever imagine. The story of the generations. My grandfather, to my father, to me, to Lewis. And we pray that that seed of the gospel would continue to grow. Today, as we think about the story of the unfolding generations that we read of in Genesis 46, give thanks to God for the family that God has placed you in, for the family that God has blessed you with. Because one day you will be part of those 1,000 generations who worship God. Jacob took his whole family down to Egypt. May it be that each and every member of our own families would come to that relationship with Jesus Christ, that all would follow him to that place that he wants to take them to. God has blessed you with a family. God blessed me with an amazing father, and I give thanks to God for him.